Okay, Alexander, let's talk about Partygate and Boris Johnson. It looks like he's in trouble, but it also looks like he might squirm his way out of this one. I think he's going to get out of this one just because there's no one around to challenge him. Not in the Conservative Party and not in Labor either. Just there's no one around. I mean, he's like the
Absolutely.
only guy there, and he's not particularly good, but it's like, the devil I guess. But we've got more news with regards to the Partygate scandal, as it is called. And there have been calls for Johnson to step down, but Johnson, I think he's kind of like, okay, I'm not going to step down, but if I did step down, who the hell would replace me? I think
Well,
he even
exactly.
knows it anyway. What's
I
what's
know. I
going
mean,
on?
he's just shrugging his shoulders and saying, I'm not even accepting in blame. I show no real contrition. I just carry on as always. Now, I have to say, this is very very ugly thing. I mean, one can take lots of views about the pandemic, but the British government, Boris Johnson's government, imposed extraordinarily harsh restrictions on people. I mean, we were pushed. I mean, I lived through very very tough lockdowns, and those are legally enforced lockdowns. And when I say legally enforced, people were fined. There were ultimately even stronger threats if you really continues continued willfully to break the lockdown rules. You could be arrested, you could be convicted, you could be all sorts of things. And it now turns out that Boris Johnson and his team were having lots of meetings and parties in the garden at number 10, and there were emails circulating amongst officials saying we mustn't discuss this or talk about this because what we're doing is breaking the laws, breaking the rules which we're imposing on everyone else. I mean, they clearly knew about the fact that it was breaking the rules, and yet they went and did it anyway. And there's been lots of information now that lots of alcohol that was there, that some of these parties actually got quite riotous. And of course, this is having a very bad effect on the country. People remember the lockdowns, they remember what they were being told, they are very angry. And you're absolutely right. The only reason that Boris Johnson is surviving this, and one can say that this is a trivial affair. In some respects, it, in terms of the overall state of things, you could say it's trivial. But when a prime minister treats his country, the people who've elected him, with this kind of condescension and contempt, it doesn't go down well. And that's putting it mildly. But the reason he's still there, the reason that I fully expect him to survive, is because there is no one to take over. The Conservative Party has no remotely credible challenger or alternative. I mean, Liz Truss, I mean, I find the idea of her becoming Prime Minister almost comical, and I think most people in Britain do. Ben Wallace, who's the Defence Secretary, some people have talked him up. I have to say that he doesn't come across to me as a particularly inspiring figure, and frankly, I don't think anybody takes that seriously. Kwasi Kwarteng, who I discussed before, well, he seems to have faded out. He seems to be taking a backseat, and there's criticisms of him anyway, mounting criticisms, because he's been blamed for the fact that he's got no obvious response to the rise in energy bills. Not obvious, not easy to see what he could do, but there we go. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, is discredited because he's taken steps which many people see as, if not exactly breaking the law, at least again playing us all for laughs on tax and all that. And the Labour opposition looks completely unconvincing. And most Conservative MPs, I think, still feel that if there was an election tomorrow, Boris Johnson would lead the Conservatives to victory, and probably no one else would. So that's why Boris Johnson survives. I've never known things, just as I said in that video we did recently, I've never known things in Britain in some ways as bad as they are now, in the sense that we have a massive economic crisis. Inflation is definitely now, in my opinion, in double figures. There's a massive cost of living crisis. We are now definitely, it seems, going to have a rail strike, which is going to paralyze much of the economy, in fact, most of the economy. We've had an election in Northern Ireland, which has brought Sinn Féin to power in Northern Ireland, or at least brought Sinn Féin is now the biggest party in Northern Ireland, and they're active anti-British secessionist party out of which the IRA grew. I mean, you may support United Ireland and all that, but still it's a sign of the malaise. And we have a government that is not interested, has no plan or policy about what to do, a prime minister who is widely disliked and despised, and no alternative to him. I've never known things in Britain as bad as this.
Okay, so usually in this type of scenario, one of two things happens, I believe. Either someone rises up who you've never expected to come along, someone comes along that is a real leader and puts the country back together. For example, what happened in Russia in the end of the 90s, where, Putin, I don't want to say he came out of nowhere, but he was an unknown figure and he just kind of came into power. And who would have expected that he would put the country back together again? And the country was in near collapse. It was close to complete collapse on all levels, society, economic, you name it. And this guy came along, and it seemed that he came along out of nowhere, but, he became president, and, the rest is history, as they say. So something like that happens, or you get a complete collapse. I mean, no leader comes along, no one capable shows up, and you just get this malaise turns into just complete rot, and the whole thing just collapses, and that's that. I mean, usually it's one of the two things that happens when you have this type of situation.
Yes.
Which one is it going to be?
Well, which one indeed? I mean, can I just say what you talked about Putin and Russia? We had something very similar happen to Britain in the 70s. I mean, again, there was a period of great malaise in Britain in the 70s. And a personality emerged who was Margaret Thatcher. She'd been a cabinet minister in Heath's government, but an education minister. Not particularly popular, not seen as particularly successful, widely distrusted within the Conservative Party, seen as a ridiculous figure by many in the country. And yet she became Conservative leader. And of course, in the 1980s, she became a very, very strong and effective prime minister. And she did turn things round. Now, is there any personality like that in Britain today? I have to say straightforwardly, I cannot see one. I mean, I remember Thatcher at that time. I remember Thatcher in the 70s when people were laughing at her and not taking her seriously. But there was no doubt that she was a personality. I look at the politicians in both the major parties, both Conservative and Labour, and I just can't see any real personalities there. I can't see anybody who has any clear idea of what to do or of how to chart a way forward, or who has anything that even remotely resembles a plan. And you talked about the alternatives, a strong personality coming forward. I see no sign of that. I would also say that the way the political class is structured in Britain today makes it all but impossible to see how such a political figure could emerge. There would almost immediately be movements to try to block that person. But anyway, I don't see any sign of a strong figure emerging. A complete collapse in Britain is possible, but this is a country with enormous institutional strength and with a very law-abiding population. I think the greatest danger is that what we're going to get instead is a prolonged period of decay and decline, which will eventually, inevitably, result in some kind of collapse. I hope I'm wrong, but that's, it seems to me, the outlook we're facing at the moment. And one of the most interesting and telling things is that parts of the Conservative media which have supported Johnson, are now turning against him and are talking in exactly the way that I've just done, that Britain is in decline, that it is in decay, that there is no way out.
Yeah, and the Johnson government needs to stop with this Ukraine, we're going to
Oh,
fight Russia
absolutely.
nonsense, and they need to
Well,
start
absolutely.
focusing inwards and focusing on the country.
Absolutely.
They're not capable to do it, but they should. That's what they should. That should be the first thing that
Absolutely.
a capable and responsible advisor would tell Boris Johnson. Stop sending money to Zelensky. Stop dealing with this stuff. This is an easy thing to do. Just stop it, and let's start focusing on our country. They're not going to do it. But what are the chances of a UK type of breakup again, or a
Oh, it's
fracturing? Is
they're
that
becoming.
possible going forward?
Yeah, it is. It's becoming much more real because, first of all, I mean, let's start with Northern Ireland. I mean, we've now got Sinn Féin as the biggest party in Northern Ireland, and that is a dramatic shift. I mean, that is something that would have been considered inconceivable a few years ago, and they are an openly secessionist party. So, I've always thought that United Ireland is now all but certain, but we are moving ever faster in that direction. And in Scotland, there's now again talk of another independence referendum coming. And I would have thought the momentum to that, if we are in a state of decay, is going to grow. The problem is, if Scotland leaves and if Northern Ireland leave, will England and Wales stick together? Once upon a time, I would have said it was inconceivable that Wales would ever break away. It just goes to show how demoralised I am about the state of the country, that I'm not even convinced of that anymore. I think that as things go spiralling downwards, the possibility of Wales also breaking away, small and unsustainable though I think it would be, economically speaking, even that possibility must now be treated as very real.
Would it be a stretch to say that lockdowns coupled with Ukraine is has led to these possibilities, has led to the UK's decay? These two
Yeah, it's
things.
absolutely. Well, of course they have, because
It's
but it's
weird.
all.
It's weird that
It,
yeah. It's,
yeah, I don't think I think it's entirely plausible way of putting it, but you always got to come back to the personality of the prime minister, because you look to someone, especially in Britain, where the prime minister is very very powerful. I mean, the entire British system works around the prime minister. I mean, he is the key figure because remember he has the power of the monarch in his hands, and without a strong prime minister able to chart a clear course, the civil service stops working properly and the cabinet becomes gummed up. And that's what's happened. Now, Boris won the Brexit war. He then got submerged in the pandemic and the lockdowns, where you could possibly give him an excuse for that. And you could say, well, so did everybody else. Though I have to say, I personally can't forgive him for his behaviour with all these parties. But all right, put that aside. You could just say, all right, the pandemic, it wasn't his fault. It just hit him. But coming out of that, he should have charted a clear course. He's shown no sign of knowing how to. And instead, as you rightly said, he's just decided that he's going to focus instead on Ukraine, play Churchill, imagine himself leading this great war against the great united Western Front against the Russian bear, something that is of no value to Britain or the British people, and which in any way is becoming increasingly clear. I mean, it was based on a complete misunderstanding of the power dynamics. So you're right, the pandemic and the Ukraine war have massively weakened the system, but you can't take the responsibility away from Johnson. He was in an all-powerful position back in 2019, 2020, after he won the election and had won the Brexit war, and he's thrown away his victory.
wow. Yeah. What a 180, huh? Got Brexit, and it's so ironic. He gets the UK out of the EU only to destroy the UK.
Yes, yes, yes. And notice it was not done because, hard Brexit or any of that. That wasn't what is creating these problems. It's, as I said, a prime minister and a government that is completely adrift.
All right, we will leave it there. The Duran.locals.com, everybody, and Duran Shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY.